Hi, I'm Gavin.
And I'm Ryan.
Merry Christmas, and this is the S.O.U.N.D Project. Okay, so it is Christmas,
It is.
and we thought, what better episode to record than to be something about the U.S. Green Building Council, right? So we're going to talk about LEED today, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environment Design.
Yep.
And what that is something the U.S. Green Building Council put together that helps people, architects and other designers, have certain requirements to hit to have good green building standards, you know, and to help with our environment. We'll go through some of the different things that it assists with. But it comes into our world quite often when we're working with architects and new buildings that are being built, because not only is it something where there's you can use sustainable materials and have good energy requirements in a building, but there's also an acoustical component to that. And so we get involved with a lot of projects where architects will reach out and say, hey, we're embarking on this project that we're trying to hit certain LEED certifications, and you can get points for acoustics. And it's nice to get an acoustical consultant like ourselves involved so that we can navigate them through that process.
Yeah.
And so with this, we've got, want to talk about the benefits of LEED certification first, because obviously there's a lot more involved when it comes to the design and sometimes cost of a building to hit LEED certification. But some of the benefits is, one is you can save money on operational costs. Like there's a lot of efficient ways to heat and cool buildings to hit these LEED points, and so over time you can end up saving on costs with solar power and other things like that. You also got to reduce energy use and carbon emissions, which is obviously something that a lot of organizations would like to do when they're building a new space, to make sure that they're offsetting their carbon footprint.
Yeah.
We've got it attracts tenants. Like if you're building a multi-use space, and sometimes tenants are looking for a green built building that is going to be good for the environment and good for the community. And then there's also tax incentives. There are tax incentives for getting LEED certification, and there's different levels of LEED certification, which we'll talk about, and you get different points for your tax credits, and then also for your how it gets certified. So different considerations that are involved with LEED. It's going to be energy use, water use, indoor environmental quality, material selection, and building's effect on its site. So there's a lot of different things. You used to work at Sweetwater.
Yeah.
Sweetwater is a LEED certified building, and I think it's LEED Platinum, right? Like it was the highest certification that it could get. And there's just so much that goes into it as far as when it comes to potentially like solar power. There's also where you source materials to be within a certain radius of the building itself. The type of fixtures that you use in the bathrooms, even, or where you position windows so that you get certain natural lighting, that it doesn't end up making heating and cooling costs even greater than they would be otherwise. Even down to, I know Sweetwater painted their roof white because it would be the highest reflectivity of the sunlight, and then have less requirements to cool and heat the space. And
one with Sweetwater too that always came up was the fact that like X amount of the limestone used like in Sweetwater was sourced from Indiana, which so I mean kind of like what you're saying, just that so many of the materials, or X% of the materials, have to be sourced from locally. It was kind of cool that it's like, whoa, like all that limestone is from Indiana.
Luckily, Indiana is a good source for all the limestone, especially down south. But with that, you're cutting down on all the emissions from having to either fly or truck long distances for those materials to arrive at the job site. So there's so many things that get involved with this. I mentioned the different levels of LEED. There's LEED certified, which there's a point scale, and everything is involved with this, where typically acoustics is only a few points on this scale, but it is something that gets you to this higher rating. So certified would be 40 to 49 points. You can get to silver, which is 50 to 59. Gold is 60 to 79, and then platinum is over 80 points. And there's so many different facets. I mean, the book for LEED certification is really thick, and there's a lot of things that you have to go through. And we focus on the acoustical aspects of things, but we realize that anytime you see a U.S. Green Building Council stamp on a building, you know that there's a lot of thought and design that went into something like that.
So like generally with these kinds of certifications, like at what point are they thinking about, all right, we're going to want this building or this project to be LEED certified? Like we work with a lot of universities that are really focused on the LEED certification. So is that something that's kind of an afterthought, or is it something that they're like, no, we want this LEED certification, so it's part of the planning process from the get-go?
I think it's from the get-go most of the time. It's pretty rare that you would get down the design process very far and still be able to hit these certifications, because there's so many aspects and they all have to play together. And it affects your budget, and like all of that has to be planned out way in advance. So usually when we're involved in a project, it's something that was in the first few discussions about building a space. LEED comes up.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. So acoustics in the workplace comes up often in these LEED certified buildings, because many of them end up being places where people work or play. In the workplace, you're surrounded by lots of things. You've got coworkers that are making noise. You've got maybe music that's involved with that. You've got just everyday sounds of an office environment, and so those are things that really mean a lot to the people that are working in those environments. And I know here in our office, there's sometimes where a lot of people are just on headphones because they're trying to focus in and not be distracted by something else. So that's all those different sounds. You have to make sure that people can still be efficient and operate properly.
For sure.
And then there's also the OSHA permissible exposure limits, the PELs. We've got a slide here that shows basically, to not have hearing loss, you should only be exposed to certain decibel levels for a certain duration. And the higher the SPL level, the higher the decibel level, the shorter the time period you can be exposed to it. And this is straight from OSHA, this chart here, where for 8 hours, you shouldn't be exposed to more than 90 decibels for a duration of 8 hours. Now, sometimes I know that whenever I go to like a major city, like it's so funny how the bars in major cities are so much louder than ones in smaller cities. I remember when I used to go up to Chicago all the time for concerts and go to a bar with a friend. Some nights my ears were ringing when I left the bar, and there wasn't even a live band playing. It was just the music that was playing in the bar and all the people and everything else. And so it could be over 90 decibels for an 8-hour shift for a waitress or a bartender or something like that in those spaces. And technically that's against OSHA regulations. Now, when that decibel level goes up and you've got, let's say, 110 decibels, that could be the loudness of a typical concert. And for 110, OSHA recommends to not be exposed for that for over a half an hour, right? So that doesn't line up, right? If that's what a concert is, and it's only a half-hour duration, sometimes these concerts with opening acts and then the band and everything, you might be exposed to that for 3 or 4 hours. And so that's why I always recommend, hearing protection when you go to a concert. I've got these really great custom molded earplugs that have a decibel filter built into them, and it drops everything by 15 decibels. So it doesn't. I really don't like the foam earplugs where you put those in and then suddenly you're muting all the higher frequencies. It sounds really masked. These actually drop everything 15 decibels, so it's just like turning the volume knob down in your car. And so, do you have a pair of those?
I don't have a custom pair, but I do have I forget what the brand is, but they act better. They're better than the foam ones, but they act similarly to where it's cutting everything at the same level.
A lot of the people in the office have gotten these earplugs from a good friend of ours, Dawn Flynn, here in town. She runs a company called eareverything.com, and she does custom molded earplugs for NASCAR drivers, IndyCar drivers, touring musicians, and we're lucky to have her here. She's just also a wealth of knowledge. It's really fun to hear her talk about audiology while she's doing it. But it's important to have earplugs when you're exposed to these loud things. I even wear them just to cut the grass in my yard, or when I'm flying on an airplane, I always wear them too. Like a lot of times people think that you get tired when you travel because you're so stressed out. It's actually because you're just processing noise constantly, like the engine noise and people noise and things like that. You can shut your eyes, but you can't shut your ears. Your brain is always processing it. So pro tip, if you wear earplugs while you travel, it actually, you're way more refreshed and you get off the plane feeling good.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Next slide here. So again, with the acoustics in the workplace, there's a lot of studies that show that the lack of sound privacy or like sound spilling into your work environment, it's the most common frustration people have with their work environment, and over a lot of other things like if it's heating or cooling issues or not enough natural light or anything like that. Acoustics is usually the one thing that people complain about the most in these spaces. And if you have a lack of privacy, there's not only just the distractions that are involved, but then there's also, in some situations, you've got like HIPAA laws in healthcare facilities, and then sensitive information where maybe there's a boss that's having a meeting with somebody, and then you don't want the rest of the office to be able to hear it. So it's important to try to take care of all of those things. In fact, here's a chart here that shows a analysis of some data that the Center for the Built Environment did, where they polled a lot of different people to see what their biggest complaints were with their work environment. And obviously, there's a lot of complaints. Hopefully, there's not as many complaints here at Haversick Designs as there are on this chart. Yep. But the notice the sound privacy is the one that is close to 60% of complaints, people complaining about the sound privacy. And these different lines that you see on here, you have the black, dark gray, light blue, and dark blue. Those are for different environments. Yep. So one is an enclosed private office. That's the black line. Dark gray is enclosed shared offices. Light gray is cubicles with high partitions, like tall partitions. Light blue is cubicles with low partitions, and the dark blue is an open office plan. And
that's kind of wild how like close to 20% is enclosed private offices are still complaining about private like sound privacy.
Yeah, because private office, while it seems like it implies that you have privacy, I think it's just defined as like it has walls and a door.
Right.
Like that's it. Even though it may not actually be private, sure. It's someone that has their own space. But those, if built poorly, you can easily hear people from room to room. So we have sound privacy where in the cubicles with high partitions, sound privacy was about 58% of the people complained. With the low partitions, it was like 56% of the people complained. So really not much of a change of high partitions versus low partitions, which makes sense because with these partitions, sound travels like water does. And so you imagine filling up these cubicles with water, it's just going to spill out over the top if it's not an actual wall. So having a high one versus a low one, the high one might block a little bit more sound, but it looks like it's negligible as far as people's perception with it.
Kind of on that note too, like some places like put in white noise. They just put in white noise to kind of try to blend that down. But how does that work, and like how much would that impact something like this?
So one thing with the white noise and like active noise control, different things that you can do. Sometimes I always look at it as a last resort. It's something where if you cannot handle it with proper building techniques and sound is leaking from space to space, and there's nothing else you can do, you've exhausted all your options, then I'll turn to solutions like white noise machines to basically try to drown out the amount of sound so that maybe you hear something's going on, but you wouldn't be able to understand what's being said.
Sure.
The thing about white noise machines, though, that I don't enjoy is that the same analogy that I was making with how you get so tired traveling and wearing earplugs on planes can help you be more refreshed. Imagine having to process all that noise through an 8-hour workday. It ends up making people a little bit more tired and sluggish in environments that have white noise machines.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another thing on this chart, sound privacy is one, but then just noise level is the one right above it. And it looks like 20 to 30% the people just complain about the noise level of the space in general. Now, there's other things on here, comfort of furnishing, temperature, air quality, but none of them. Visual privacy is the next closest to sound privacy, but really the sound privacy complaints just dwarf all the other things that are going on in here. And it's a big thing that needs to be addressed. So acoustics in a green design, with the newest version of LEED, it takes acoustics into consideration even a lot more than it has in the past. There's more metrics and things that we need to hit in order to get those points to then be applied to different certification levels. And when it comes to the credits that you get, if you improve acoustical performance and all the rooms hit this acoustical performance, that's where you get those credits. We're actually involved in testing a space right now that is looking to get LEED certified, and we looked at reverb time, ambient noise level, and also sound isolation metrics like the NIC noise insulation class, which is the field metric for STC. So we tested probably 40, 50 rooms on this project. And in the first go round, it almost hit all the requirements to get all the points for LEED, but there's just a couple rooms that were a little noisy as far as the HVAC is concerned. Then that got remedied and we went and tested again, and now it hit all those levels and they're going to get their LEED points for that. And so it's a process that needs to be considered during design, but then it also has to be tested to be verified to make sure that you get those points. There's school LEED guidelines that limit HVAC background noise levels. HVAC background noise levels, in fact, it's going in our office right now. It's like I queued it up. And it can be distracting for people when HVAC kicks on. It also can mask sounds so that speech intelligibility is harder when the ambient noise level goes up. And so trying to reduce those is it's not just good to meet LEED points. These LEED certifications and LEED requirements were designed to make people's lives better, not just to hit some random requirement. All right. So the next thing here, acoustics in green design, we're continuing on that topic. Meeting the minimum LEED standards is not always enough to get people to feel like they're having a good environment when it comes to acoustics. Like you noticed that chart that was shown, sound privacy and noise level was still a complaint, and a lot of those spaces are LEED certified buildings. So sometimes just hitting that minimum value is not enough, and that's where experts like ourselves getting involved in projects, we can let you know, like, yeah, technically this is going to hit LEED, but for user satisfaction, we need to go to this next level, and we can help make for just a better environment for people.
And a really big example of that I found like while going through this was just like reverb time. Like the fact that it's frequency dependent, like if you cut down in certain frequencies, but not all of them, that it can really kind of cause a nightmare when it comes to like speech intelligibility and things like that.
Yeah, the project I was just talking about where we did testing, there were requirements for reverb time at 500, 1,000, and 2,000 hertz. But those were the targets that we had to focus in on. And this was a music building. So when it comes to music buildings, the LEED certifications are deliberately vague because there's so much subjectivity to what a music space should sound like. And so they don't want to put a number on it that says this room has to be a 0.5 second reverb time at 500 hertz, because depending on the application, you might want to adjust that. And so there's a lot more flexibility when it comes to reverb time in music spaces. Now, compared to a classroom or a private office, then there's more requirements on that front. Yeah. So speaking of reverb time, it can be a balancing act, with making sure that everything is balanced, because you could, in that example, 500, 1,000, 2,000, if you got those in range, but the low frequencies were lingering in the room 2 to 3 times as long as those, it still would be a poor environment, even though on paper it would hit those numbers. Yeah. Another thing we have issue with is room geometry in these spaces when we're dealing with acoustics, because you have flutter and slapback echoes. You've got concave surfaces that end up focusing sound to the center of the radius of curvature. Structural resonance issues, frequency imbalances. Like, it's no different. Even that we're going for LEED certification, it's still no different than just, we want to make a good sounding room, and to make sure that it's well isolated and that people aren't having problems with it when it's all said and done. So there's certain LEED rating categories that can actually hurt the acoustics of the space. And so certain things when it comes to like natural ventilation, like sometimes the natural ventilation techniques are going to institute more noise, and that can be distracting and a problem for people working in those environments. The other thing is there's a big push with LEED points to be able to use radiant heating and cooling, like radiant flooring heating. Now, if you do that, you typically no longer have carpet on the floor, which could help absorb some of that sound. Not only airborne sound, but like squeaky shoes or anything like that on that floor. If it's radiant flooring, a lot of times that you don't get the help of a soft material on top of it. And chilled beams is another one in the ceilings, and things that you can't necessarily cover with acoustical materials. And so while it hits LEED points in some areas, it can make the acoustics a lot worse for people. And then the other thing is natural lighting. So with LEED, a lot of times there's an effort to lower those partitions and cubicles so that more natural light ends up getting to the workstation. But then if you lower the partition, then more sound can spill over. And so it's just one of those games of Tetris, where all the pieces have to fit together to get a good environment while still trying to hit these LEED certification requirements. All right. So when it comes to acoustics, there's some things that you can do in these spaces. A lot of times we're talking about work environments right now, but it could be anything. It could be a healthcare facility. It could be a sports complex. It could be all sorts of things. But one of the things is a green roof, like having actual like a living green roof on your building. That helps with rain noise and impact noise, and also can help with heating and retaining heat within a building. And so that is one technique that's used often. People will use stretched fabric acoustical systems to make it look like it was intentional instead of just having acoustical panels after the fact to fix a problem. So the stretched fabric systems can help with visually making it a very calm environment. Acoustical plaster is the same way. Like if you want a hard drywall surface like this, but you want it to be absorptive, acoustical plaster is a good way to do that, because it'll look just like a plaster wall, except it's kind of weird to be in those spaces with acoustical plaster because you're expecting a longer reverb time than it actually is. Right. And it doesn't make sense. Like, at least to my brain, I'm always walking into spaces and visually I can almost hear the room before I hear it. And acoustical plaster is one of those crazy misnomer of a product. And then there's custom design treatments. And that's really a lot of these projects we get involved with. We're custom designing things so that it meets their aesthetic requirements, but then also hits these metrics that we're shooting for.
So yeah, LEED is one of those things that, I mean, like you had mentioned, I used to work at Sweetwater, and so I really didn't know anything about LEED until I started working there, because they really kind of like show it off to some extent, where it's like, they're really proud of their LEED certification. And it's something that, like, when we give tours, like almost every time, like someone would ask about it.
So, I mean, and I would say the reason people show it off is because it's not easy. Like it shows a couple things. It shows commitment to caring about that, like to be able to make sure that you have a sustainable building that you're building for the future. But then also it's like no one gets LEED certification by accident. Like it's something where people have to work really hard, and I'm sure there's cases where building owners would go down the path of LEED certification, then realize how difficult it is, and then turn back and not do it because of the cost or the extra design time or anything like that. So it really shows like an ambition to be able to make it happen. So yeah, every time I've been up to Sweetwater and gotten the tour, it's all over the building, and rightly so, because they worked really hard at doing it.
The other thing too with LEED is that it's not one of those things that just because you're trying to become LEED certified means that like your space has to feel clinical or not look cool. Like there's a lot of room to still make it really neat aesthetically, and even like completely custom. So
and I think that it's one of those things where anytime you're building a building, there's this huge team that has to come together to make it happen. There's the client, there's the architect, there's interior designers, acoustical consultants, structural engineers, MEP consultants. There's like the team is just massive, and everybody working together and communicating effectively. It doesn't have to be an afterthought. It doesn't have to be something where it's like, all right, we built this space and now it sounds horrible. Like if we predict and do our job properly, we're going to know that before it ever becomes an issue and can put in like really neat solutions to make it, not something that is going to be looked at as like, man, that's a Band-Aid solution.
Right.
You don't want that in any job.
Exactly.
So we really enjoy getting involved with these projects. They're probably not as frequent as our other projects necessarily because it is a big undertaking, but we love being a resource for people, architects and clients. If they're going after this, having conversations with us about LEED can really kind of set them up for success.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being a part of the S.O.U.N.D project. And if you have any considerations about LEED, that questions that you may have, feel free to comment below and we'll get back to you on that. And we will see you next week.